All right, so this is an INTJ survival guide, part one on inferior SE. So on the left here we got dominant introverted intuition. This is your superiority complex. You got the all-seeing eye and shit because you think you can see everything on the inside of your mind. And then on the right we have inferior extroverted sensation, which is symbolized by, we just got some blurry vision here. Somebody that forgot their glasses before they went driving. So if you got this, whatever, you get it. You got your superiority complex on the left, and then you've got a not so good looking picture on the right. That's your inferiority complex. Okay, so on the left we've got introverted intuition. What is that? Well, it's your dominant function. You don't even have to ask what that is. If you're watching this video, you don't need me to tell you that. It's your dominant function. What does it do? It perceives inner images that are based on external objects. That might be something, if you're new to type, you don't even know. But long story short, we've got here this. I try to make an image in ChatGPT of an eye looking at a tree, and then in the mind's eye having like this symbol of a tree of life, but didn't really work out that way. But basically right here, we've got, imagine there's somebody looking at a tree. Okay, and then in their mind's eye they see this symbol. Okay, so the problem with that is that when your introverted intuition gets one-sided and you start undervaluing the other functions, then it's kind of like you're looking at external objects like they have a QR code and just kind of scanning them and then tossing them aside to then look at the inner images. So here on the left, if you think about this, it's like, okay, imagine this is like the biggest building in the world, right? It's like the Burj Khalifa or something like that. I don't even know if I pronounced it right. But whatever. It's your inferior extroverted sensation might just be like, okay, it's a tall building. Okay? This is from what it looks like to having a superiority complex that's introverted intuition. It's like, okay, this is a tall building. Okay? Now, keep aside that this is like one of the most impressive feats of human engineering. Doesn't matter. It's a tall building. Okay, to dominant, super dominant, one-sided introverted intuition, all we care about is the symbolism, because we're scanning this thing like a QR code. We're taking a look at this thing with our eyes, and it looks like it's a sunny day, so you're feeling the warmth of the day. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's what's more important to your dominant, one-sided introverted intuition is the symbolism. So like I wrote there, it says the eyes see a tall building and the mind's eye sees the Tower of Babel or something like that. So you get what I mean? Like thinking in terms of imagery, but then also like putting the imagery over what you're actually looking at, and that can be an issue. Okay, so trying to illustrate this a little bit better, it's like, take a look on the left. Like I've got basically a hoarder's den on the left, and then you got the QR code scanner, and then on the right you have a bunch of symbolism, like you've got like an Ankh, tree of life, all this Jungian stuff. So basically what I'm trying to show here is that if you rely too much on introverted intuition, then you kind of go from object to object, like I said, like a QR scanner being like, all right, this reminds me of this makes me think of this makes me think of that, and then you kind of just you devalue the actual external experience, and then you sort of just like a hoarder just hoard all these inner perceptions and then just kind of go in your own little world. One of the cool things about introverted intuition is that it can help somebody have a really good imagination, so it can help you conceptualize difficult problems, but you actually have to work on those problems and engage with them in real life. So the issue becomes when you're imagining too much and you're engaging with the outside world too little. Okay. So on the left I've got, again, this just says one-sided NI, which is like you've got just like the hoarder's pile. You have all this symbolism, and then what happens is on the right I'm trying to show, I've got like an eye exam that's blurred out. Okay, so what I'm trying to show here is that it's like your extroverted sensation, so the way that you actually register the real world and you engage with the real world is sort of like blurred because you're hoarding a bunch of inner imagery. And it's just kind of, it's what happens for everybody's dominant function. It's like you have a dominant, and then the inferior function gets kind of ignored for a little bit. Okay, So we get that. So when you're hoarding all these inner images, that's might not be how it feels to you, but if you're hoarding all these inner images, then you might be blurring or dulling your actual extroverted sensation, or your actual how you're engaging with the real world. All right. So what happens is that your inferior extroverted sensation, that says inferior extroverted, whatever, pretend it says inferior extroverted sensation, it's going to start showing up randomly. Okay, so you'll have these random intense periods of extroverted sensation clarity. And I think in the next video, like part 2, I'll get into like what you're supposed to do about that, or quote unquote theoretically what you're supposed to do with that. But one of the things is that's just something that's going to happen if you start hoarding all of those you know, perceptions. You're in your thoughts too much, or in your imagination. That's probably a better way of saying it. You're focusing on what you're seeing with your mind's eye instead of your actual eyes. You know what I mean? Then you may have these random periods where you're just all of a sudden just sort of taken into extroverted sensing for a brief period, and you don't really know why. Okay. All right. And the reason this happens, quote unquote, theoretically, is because from the ego's perspective, you know, you're this all-seeing, you know, your introverted intuition is the eye of providence, right? It's the all-seeing eye. And then your extroverted sensing is kind of like this, you know, archaic, primitive personality that's a caveman. But it's sort of different than, I'll probably get into this later in other videos, but it's more like your inferior function is just a little bit closer to nature. So it works in weird ways. It's not really that it's subordinate to your dominant function, if that makes sense. So I'll go into that in a second. But basically what I wrote there was from the ego perspective. Your extroverted sensing is basically just there as a servant of intuition. And then intuition is just hoarding the inner images because it doesn't want to deal with anything else. Okay? So that's sort of what happens here. Like you have this like caveman view of extroverted sensing. I think this is already almost 10 minutes. Okay, so long story short, what ends up happening is that with this little figure here, what I'm trying to show is that to the degree that you get one-sided with introverted intuition, and it's really hard to notice that you're doing this, you're gonna start having unconscious extroverted sensing backlashes. Okay, so I don't really, if you're watching this, I don't need to tell you or go into, okay, long story short, you know when you need to get outside. Okay, so that's what the second part of this is gonna be, like what to do about this. But long story short, if you let this problem, if you let yourself think that it's really not a problem, then it'll become a problem, because then you'll start doing all this SE stuff, and it's like trying to get like the cerebral part of yourself to go one direction, and then the other part of yourself is your extroverted sensing personality, or your inferiority complex is going in a completely different direction. Okay, so like the goal of like integration in depth psychology is to get these two things to kind of come together, to sort of notice when you're not paying enough attention to your other functions. And one of the big ones is your extroverted sensing. And it's like, okay, why? And it's because, okay, if you're trying to register something as an inner image, but you need to sense it as an external object first, it's like your mind's eye is only perceiving things that you're actually registering with your actual eye. So it's like if your actual eye is looking at certain things and you're not aware that your extroverted sensing is making you go look at other things other than what you want to get cerebral about, it's like what sort of happens is that you will just not really be able to tap into that NI and get cerebral in the way you want to when you need to. So it kind of flips. So it's like normally you won't be able to use your SE when you need it if you don't pay attention to it. But then sometimes the situation can flip where it's like, okay, now the SE is really blurry, but all of a sudden you just end up in these situations where you're like, okay, why am I here again? Like, why am I doing this? Oh, and then you're like, and then you try to go back to NI, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm not really interested in the same NI stuff I was before. And it's like, okay, well, the reason is because your SE took you to a place where you're no longer perceiving the same things, okay? So All right, that's 12 minutes. So this is the first part of this, and I'll talk about probably in the second one, like what are you supposed to do about that. But yeah, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you don't need me to tell you any of this stuff. But this is probably for like, I don't know, this is for new people that, or maybe new to intermediate people who are like, okay, well, like, how can I boil down to NI in a, in a simple way, and then how does that interact with extroverted sensing? And it's like, okay, you perceive things with your senses that are real, but then in your head, you've got like an imaginary model of it. But the imaginary model of it is based upon what you're actually sensing in reality. So if and it's like it's two kinds of personalities, and yeah, if you don't get them to synergize, then you can have one going one way and one going the other. Okay, so all right, I'll see you guys in the next one.